My name is Raymond Carter, and I want to tell you a story about my daughter, about a girl I once carried on my shoulders, who wrapped her tiny hands around my thumbs, and who used to fall asleep on my chest as if my heartbeat was the safest rhythm she could imagine. A girl who grew up to stand in a white dress under a bright chandelier, and look me in the eyes as if she had never seen me before. But to understand that moment, you'd have to understand me. Not the version people assume, not the caricature that finds its way into gossip or courthouse whispers, but the real me. The me that tried and failed and tried again. A man who loved imperfectly, but never without sincerity. I wasn't the best husband, I'll tell you that up front. I wasn't cruel or unfaithful or reckless, just absent in 1,000 small ways, the kind of absence that accumulates like dust in the corners of a house no one bothers to sweep. I worked too much, convinced myself that providing was the same thing as parenting. I missed dance recitals, forgotten lunches, orthodontist appointments, not out of neglect, but out of the misguided belief that money was the currency of love. By the time I realized how wrong I was, the marriage was over. My ex-wife Denise had always had a tongue sharp enough to slice through any flimsy excuse I tried to patch together. She used to say, "Ray, you love the idea of being a father more than the work of being one." And though I argued loud, stubborn, full of pride, a small part of me knew she wasn't entirely wrong. When the divorce papers were signed, I stood outside the courtroom with a pen in my hand and the sinking feeling that something sacred had slipped through my fingers. Maya was 10 then, small, quiet, observant, the kind of child who carried disappointment like a bruise beneath the skin, invisible to everyone except the one who caused it. The custody arrangement was fair on paper, but cold in reality. Alternate weekends, Wednesday dinners, summers cut down the middle like a pie no one enjoys dividing. Every time she packed her little overnight bag, she looked at me as if we were rehearsing a script neither of us had written. Still, I tried. God knows I tried. I learned to braid hair poorly, but with enthusiasm. I showed up to parent. Teacher conferences with notes prepared like I was presenting at work. I cooked dinners, burned dinners, ordered pizzas when the smoke alarm refused to quiet down. I told myself these small attempts would matter, that Maya would see me trying, that one day she'd understand. But children don't remember the intention behind absence. They just remember the empty seat at the school auditorium. And even when they forgive, some part of the ledger remains. Over the years, the relationship between Denise and me didn't soften. If anything, it calcified. She remarried a man named Howard, a banker, the kind of man who ironed the sleeves of his shirts with the precision of a drill sergeant. He was everything I wasn't, punctual, polished, always presentable, the kind of guy who arrives early to the airport for a domestic flight, the kind who keeps his shoes immaculate and his opinions firm. Still, he treated Maya well, and that was enough for me to let the rest slide. As Maya grew older, she grew quieter around me. Not cold, just measured. Like every word she spoke had to be weighed first. I could feel her pulling away not in dramatic bursts, but in slow degrees. A father feels that, even if he pretends not to, but life goes on, children grow up. And then somehow too quickly they're standing in a wedding dress someone else helped them choose. I first heard about the engagement through a text message. A text message, "Dad, I'm getting married." No emoji. No exclamation mark, no phone call. Just a line of text that stared at me from the screen like it was afraid to take up too much space. I remember sitting down at the kitchen table, the phone still glowing in my hand. I typed out 3 different replies and erased all of them. Finally, I settled on, "Congratulations, tell me everything." She didn't, not for weeks. I learned more about the venue from her Instagram story than from her lips. A vineyard north of the city, rustic charm, long wooden tables, twinkle lights arranged like constellations someone had pulled down to earth. A place beautiful enough to belong in a magazine spread. I was happy for her. I truly was, but beneath the warmth of that happiness was something else, something tight, something brittle. Her wedding day arrived in early summer, one of those days where the heat drapes itself over everything like a heavy blanket, and the air hums with cicadas and distant laughter. I wore the suit she had suggested months before, navy blue, tailored, simple. I practiced my father of the bride's speech in the mirror until the words tasted like dry paper on my tongue. When I arrived at the venue, the parking attendant asked if I was a vendor. A vendor? I shrugged it off. Mistakes happen. But when I walked toward the check-in table, the woman flipping through the guest list took one look at my name and frowned. "Oh," she said, "just that one syllable. I don't see you listed as part of the family seating. You're on the general guest side." General guest side, like a coworker or a distant cousin. I laughed it off again, though the sound came out hollow. "Must be an oversight." I told her, "I'm the father." She blinked, apologized, and handed me a standard guest badge. A badge at my daughter's wedding. I should have insisted, should have demanded she call someone. But pride is a strange thing. When it's wounded, it doesn't roar. It whispers, it tells you not to make a scene, not to embarrass yourself, not to confirm what you already fear. So I took the badge. The ceremony was beautiful, I'll give her that. Maya looked radiant, glowing in that effortless way young brides do. And when she walked down the aisle, escorted by Howard, I felt something in my chest twist sharply, not anger, not jealousy, but a kind of grief I hadn't prepared for. Like watching someone else finish a story you started writing. She didn't look at me, not once. Her eyes stayed fixed ahead or on the guests or on the ground, anywhere but toward the man who had given her his last name. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself she was nervous, overwhelmed. But when the officiant asked, "Who gives this woman?" and Howard answered with calm authority, I felt the truth settle over me like dust. I was a guest at my own daughter's wedding. The reception was worse. People didn't recognize me, or if they did, it was only in the vague way someone recognizes a face from an old yearbook. "You're her uncle." "No, I'm her father." "Oh, that oh, again." That echo of misplacement during the father-daughter dance, my dance they called Howard. I watched them move together under the soft glow of string lights while guests dabbed tears from their eyes. And I stood in the shadow of it all, hands trembling slightly as I held a glass I didn't remember picking up. Still, I stayed, because leaving felt like admitting defeat, and I had spent too many years pretending everything was fine to start unraveling now. At the end of the night, when the servers were clearing tables and the DJ was packing up equipment, Maya finally approached me. For a heartbeat, hope rose small, fragile, foolish. She stopped 2 feet away. Close enough for me to smell the faint perfume she used to steal from her mother, close enough to touch. But she didn't. She said, "Dad, thank you for coming. Nothing else, not I'm sorry, not I wish things were different." Just a polite sentence a hostess might offer a customer on their way out. Then she turned away to join her husband and new family, and I stood there, all dressed up with nowhere to place the love I'd carried for 24 years. I thought that was the worst part of the night. I was wrong. The worst part came 2 weeks later, in a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a bill, itemized, detailed, absolute, total due, $4, $197,630, 17. For the wedding, for her wedding, a wedding she had pretended I wasn't even part of. And at the bottom, in handwriting, I recognized instantly the looping cursive of a 10-year old who used to sign her school permission. Slips with artistic flourish were 5 words. "Thanks for covering this, Dad." I stared at that bill for a long time before I could bring myself to breathe again. It didn't feel real at first. It felt like one of those moments your mind refuses to accept because acceptance would require rearranging everything you thought you understood. I set the paper on the kitchen counter, then picked it up again, as if the numbers might change if I looked at them from a different angle. $497,630.17. I ran my thumb over the ink, smudged it slightly. I even held it up to the light like it might be counterfeit. But the print was sharp, the charges detailed, the handwriting unmistakable. The signature was the part that struck me hardest, not because she signed it, but because she signed it like she used to sign my Father's Day cards, looping letters, light pressure, a flourish at the end. She had always been proud of how her penmanship looked. I used to tell her it looked like something from an old novel. I set the paper down again and felt something inside me go very still. People talk about anger like it's hot, like it burns, but this wasn't fire, it was ice, slow, forming, quiet, a coldness that gathered in my chest and began to crystallize. I didn't call her that night, didn't call anyone. I just sat in the living room with the bill resting on my lap like some strange newborn I didn't know what to do with. The ceiling fan hummed, the refrigerator clicked. Outside, a dog barked at nothing. Life continued its small noises while the biggest one gathered behind my ribs. It wasn't just expensive, it was excessive, and it wasn't the kind of thing you plan on the assumption someone might pay for it. This was planned under the assumption someone already had, someone like me. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed until dawn painted a wash of dull gray across the room, and when the sun finally climbed high enough to pull the shadows away from the carpet, I made a decision. I wasn't going to yell, I wasn't going to accuse, I wasn't going to beg for answers. I was going to ask my daughter calmly, clearly, directly why she had done this. When I called, she answered on the second ring. Her voice was bright, too bright, like someone trying to sound cheerful while balancing something fragile. "Hi, Dad." The enthusiasm was so out of place I almost wondered if she had forgotten. Forgotten the envelope she had signed. Forgotten the number she had written. Forgotten the cold space she'd left me standing in at her wedding. "Hi, Maya," I said, steadying my breath. "Got something in the mail." Silence just for a moment. A pause sharp as a pinprick. "Oh," she said softly. There it was again, that tiny syllable that had followed me around her wedding day like a shadow. You got that?" "Yes," I answered. "I did." Another silence. Longer this time, heavy. "I thought Mom was going to talk to you," she said finally. I leaned back in my chair. "Well, she didn't." "Oh," she repeated. "Maya." I said, "You sent me a bill for $500,000. I need you to explain to me why." There was a rustle on the other end of the line, fabric shifting, maybe, or nerves settling uneasily. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, softer, smaller. "It wasn't supposed to be like that," she said. "What was it supposed to be like?" I thought you'd want to help." "Helping is one thing." I said, "This is something else." "I know," she whispered. Her voice cracked on that second word, not enough to cry, but enough to reveal something underneath. Something uncertain, something young, and for a moment I almost softened, but that bill was still sitting on the counter. "Maya," I said, "why didn't you talk to me before the wedding? Why didn't you ask? Why didn't you even mention any of this?" She took a long breath. "Because I didn't think you'd say yes. And sending me the bill afterward guaranteed that I wouldn't have the chance to say no." I replied. Another pause, then a quiet, shaky exhale. "It wasn't my idea," she said. I closed my eyes. I knew immediately whose idea it was. "Your mother?" I asked. Silence, the kind that wasn't uncertainty but confirmation. She said you owed it." Maya said, her voice trembling. "She said you missed so much when I was a kid, that this was your chance to make it right, that you had money saved, and you'd probably be relieved to spend it on something meaningful." I felt my jaw tighten. Not from anger, though I felt plenty of that, but from something heavier. Shame, maybe, or regret, or the realization that mistakes you made decades ago could still reach across time and grab your throat. "Maya," I said carefully, "is that why you didn't want me involved in the planning? Because you assumed I'd pay without being present?" She didn't answer. "Look at me," I said, forgetting for a moment that she couldn't see me. "Please," her breath hitched. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she repeated. "I didn't want to embarrass you. I didn't want to make things awkward." I echoed softly. "You had another man walk you down the aisle." She inhaled sharply. "He raised me too. I'm not denying that," I said gently. "I'm glad he was good to you, but that doesn't erase me." Her voice hardened not with anger, but with defense reflexes she must have learned over years of triangulated loyalties. "It's complicated, Dad." "I know it is," I said, "but ignoring someone isn't the same thing as resolving something." She didn't respond. I could hear her breathing, shaky and uneven. Then she said quietly, "I didn't think you'd come." That stopped me. "What? I thought you'd skip it," she whispered. "You missed things before, big things, small things. I thought the wedding would be another thing you'd miss, and I thought, if you weren't going to show up, then I didn't want to build the day around you." A pause. "And I didn't want to be disappointed." The words hit me like a blunt force to the chest, not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. "You think I wouldn't come to your wedding?" I asked softly. "I didn't know," she said. "I didn't know what mattered to you anymore. I didn't know if I mattered." I rubbed my forehead. Regret pooled in my stomach like something molten. "I showed up," I whispered. "I know," she said, "and when I saw you walk in, I panicked. I didn't know how to include you without making everything look messy, without having to explain things. Explain what? I asked. She hesitated. Explain our relationship, she said finally, and that was the sentence that broke something open inside me, not a crack, not a fracture, but a quiet unraveling, because I understood exactly what she meant. We had never defined what we were to each other. We weren't estranged. We weren't close. We weren't enemies. We weren't entirely family in the traditional sense. We existed in that gray, unspoken middle where guilt and love and history blend into something wordless. Maya, I said, I love you, even if I didn't always show it the right way. I know, she whispered. We sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, I asked, what do you expect me to do with this bill? She didn't answer right away. When she did, it was barely audible. I don't know. Do you expect me to pay it? I don't know. Her voice cracked again, and this time I heard it clearly. Fear, not entitlement, not greed. But fear the kind that builds when you've been told a story about someone for so long that you no longer know which parts are real. Maya, I said gently, did you want me at your wedding? A long silence. Then, yes, of course I did. And did you want me to pay for your entire wedding? She hesitated. No, not like this. I exhaled slowly. Then we need to talk. I said, face to face. Okay, she whispered. I'm not angry. I added, I don't believe you. She said softly. Then let me show you in person. Another pause. Then, okay. We agreed to meet that weekend. A neutral place, a cafe halfway between her house and mine. Public enough that neither of us could raise voices, quiet enough that the truth could settle between us without camouflage. When I hung up the phone, the bill still sat on the counter, waiting. I looked at it one final time. Then I folded it neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and set it beside my wallet. Whatever came next, it wouldn't be simple, and it wouldn't be painless, but for the first time since the wedding, I felt something I hadn't expected, a small, steady flicker of hope. The cafe we chose sat on the corner of a quiet street, lined with oak trees that had grown crooked over the years, bending toward the sunlight like old men leaning in to hear each other. It wasn't a fancy place. Just a small shop with mismatched chairs and the kind of chalkboard menu that tried too hard to look handwritten. But it was neutral. No memories, no history, no ghosts hanging from the ceiling. I arrived early. I always do now. Funny how time changes your habits. When I was younger, I was late for things that mattered. Now I show up early for things I dread. The barista behind the counter asked if I wanted anything while I waited. I ordered black coffee, hot, plain, uncomplicated. I took a seat near the window, the one that looked out onto the street. People came and went, carrying tote bags, dog leashes, restless toddlers. Life doing what life does. Then I saw her. Maya walked toward the cafe with her arms wrapped around herself even though the air was warm. Her shoulders were tight, her steps measured. Stress clung to her like a shadow. She paused outside the door for a few seconds, eyes closed, as if gathering courage. Then she came in. When she saw me, she offered a small, hesitant smile. The same smile she used to give me after breaking something as a child, hoping I wouldn't be mad. Hi, Dad, she said softly. Hi, sweetheart, I replied. We sat down, close enough to talk, far enough to feel the space between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she took a deep breath. Thank you for coming. I said I would. I answered gently. I always will. She looked down at her hands, twisted her wedding ring, avoided my eyes. I recognized all of it, the small behaviors of someone carrying something too heavy to say out loud. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the envelope. I didn't place it in the middle of the table. I didn't slide it toward her like evidence. I simply set it beside my coffee, like a quiet reminder of why we were there. Her eyes flicked toward it, then away. Maya, I said, I'm not here to fight with you. I'm here to understand. Her throat bobbed, I know. So help me understand. I continued. Why did you let this happen? She swallowed hard. Her fingers tightened around the sleeve of her sweater. I didn't let it happen exactly, she said. It was more like, I didn't stop it. Why not? She stared at the table. Because I didn't want to disappoint anyone. Who? I asked. My mom, Howard, his family, even the planners. Everyone kept telling me it was the most important day of my life, that it had to be perfect. I nodded, and perfection costs money. She gave a small, humorless laugh. Apparently a lot of it. I watched her carefully. There was guilt in her voice, but also confusion, like she was still trying to untangle herself from a story someone else had woven around her. Did you think I owed you this? I asked gently. She shook her head quickly. No, not exactly, She exhaled. Mom said you would be relieved to contribute, that you had savings you never used, that it would make up for things. I tapped my thumb lightly on the table, a slow, steady rhythm. And what did you think? I asked. Maya hesitated. Then, quietly, I didn't think. Her honesty surprised me. It was raw, unguarded, a crack in the wall she'd been holding up for years. I went along with everything. She continued. The decisions, the costs, the expectations, it all happened fast, and no one ever said no, not once. Everyone assumed you'd cover it. Mom said she would handle you. She said she'd talk to you before the wedding. And when she didn't, I didn't know how to undo any of it. I leaned back slightly. Why didn't you come to me sooner? She looked up at me then. Really looked, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't expected. Fear. I was scared. She whispered of me. I asked. No, she said quickly. Not you. Scared that if I asked you for anything, you'd think I only wanted you for what you could give me. Scared that if I told you how much things cost, you'd pull away, or get angry, or disappear again. I felt those words like gravel being poured into my chest. Sweetheart, I said softly, if you had called me before the wedding, I would have helped, maybe not with all of it, maybe not with the extravagance, but I would have helped, and more importantly, I would have been there in a way that mattered. She blinked fast, fighting tears. I didn't know that, I know, I said, because I didn't show you often enough. A tear slipped down her cheek. She brushed it away quickly, embarrassed. You should have been the one to walk me down the aisle, she said suddenly, voice cracking. Not Howard. I regretted it the second it happened. The confession stunned me, not because she said it, but because of the way she said it. Soft, broken, honest. Then why didn't you turn to me? I asked. She rubbed her forehead. Because you showed up, and I wasn't prepared for that. I didn't know where to put you in the story we'd already built. I nodded slowly. I didn't want to ruin the wedding by making a scene. She continued. And I didn't want to hurt Howard or my mom or confuse the guests. Everything was already in motion, and when things move that fast, Dad, you don't think, you just follow the current. I took a breath. And afterward, she winced. Afterward, I felt ashamed. I didn't know how to reach out to you without making everything worse. And then Mom handed me that envelope and said, Sign this so he knows it's from you. She made you sign it. I asked quietly. Yes, Maya whispered. She said it would look more respectful coming from me. I closed my eyes for a moment, not in anger, just in understanding. Understanding of the long, complicated history between all of us. Understanding of the ways guilt, pride, and old wounds shape decisions. When I opened my eyes again, she was watching me nervously, as if waiting for me to break. Maya, I said calmly, I'm not paying that bill. She nodded immediately, almost relieved. I know, I don't expect you to. I didn't expect you to in the first place. I raised an eyebrow. Your signature says otherwise. She winced. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should never have signed it. I shouldn't have let Mom pressure me. I shouldn't have let anyone. Then what do you want me to do with it? I asked. She wiped another tear. Rip it up, I guess. Throw it away, burn it, anything. I looked at her. Ely looked at her. And for the first time, I wasn't seeing the bride in the white dress or the child with the braids. I was seeing the woman standing in front of me now. A woman trying to undo a choice she made out of fear and pressure and years of unspoken expectations. Maya, I said, I'm willing to forgive the bill. She sniffed, nodding. But the real question is, are you willing to fix us? Her breath caught, and then, her voice barely audible, she said, yes. I reached across the table, slowly, carefully, like approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. She hesitated for half a second. Then she placed her hand in mine, warm, trembling, real. We sat like that for a long time. No words, no explanations. Just two people trying to stitch together a fabric that had been frayed for too many years. Finally she whispered, Dad, can we start over? And those 5 words hit me harder than the bill ever could. Yes, I said, we can, but beginnings are rarely simple, and ours was about to get much more complicated. I used to believe that when people talked about time healing all wounds, they were speaking with the kind of hopeful ignorance that comes from not having been cut deeply enough. I've learned over the years that time doesn't heal anything by itself. Time is just the hallway you walk down while you decide whether you're going to keep bleeding or start stitching. And even then, the scar isn't guaranteed to be pretty. Sometimes it pulls at you in strange moments, like a sudden chill in a warm room, reminding you of what was lost. The weeks after that dinner with Claire were like stepping back into a landscape I thought I had long accepted the ruins of. I went through the motions of my days: coffee in the morning, paperwork stacked neatly on my desk, quiet evenings with the television humming in the background. But my mind was always drifting somewhere else. Sometimes toward old memories, sometimes toward the uneasy future, and sometimes toward the things I feared to examine too closely. I found myself replaying the moment Claire told me she was getting married. Not the words themselves, but the tremor in her voice, that thin ribbon of hesitation she tried to smooth over with confidence. I kept wondering what she had expected my reaction to be, and why she had braced herself for something worse. I'd spent so many years believing that the problem between us had settled into a kind of permanent architecture, a cracked foundation that wasn't going to collapse, but wasn't going to be repaired either. But now that this wedding had become a real, tangible event looming on the horizon, it was as if the whole structure had started creaking again. I didn't know if I should stand back or try to hold it up with my bare hands. One evening, around a week after our conversation, Claire sent me a text. A short one, just a few lines, but it carried weight. She said she wanted to meet again, just the two of us. No distractions this time. She said she wanted to go over some things before the wedding. I read that phrase a few times. It didn't tell me much, but it told me enough to know that this meeting wasn't going to be light. I agreed. Of course I agreed. I didn't hesitate, even though part of me feared what was coming. She suggested a quiet cafe outside the city, not far from the park we used to visit when she was young. I couldn't help but wonder if the choice was deliberate, but I didn't ask. I just said yes. The day of the meeting, I arrived early. I sat by the window, hands wrapped around a cup of tea I wasn't drinking. Outside, the sky was that soft, colorless gray that makes everything look a little faded. A few families with children passed by, their laughter muffled by the glass. Watching them stirred something complicated in me, warmth mixed with a kind of sorrow that didn't have a name. When Claire walked in, she looked tired, not physically necessarily, but in the way her eyes carried an unspoken heaviness. I stood to greet her, and she smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Still, she hugged me. A real hug, not the stiff, polite ones we'd exchanged in the past. I held on to that for a moment longer than I should have. We sat down. She didn't order anything, and after a few seconds of silence, she folded her hands on the table and spoke. "I need to talk to you about something," she said. Before the wedding, her voice was steady, but I could feel the tension beneath it. Whatever this was, she had rehearsed it in her mind, possibly several times. "All right," I said softly. "Tell me." She took a breath, let it out slowly, and avoided my eyes for a moment before finally meeting them. "Dad, I want to be honest with you, because I think we've spent too many years not being honest, and I don't want that to continue into everything that's coming next." I nodded. My chest tightened, but I kept my expression open. She continued, "I know our relationship hasn't been easy. I know you tried your best, and I know I didn't always understand the things you were going through. I was young, and I was angry, and I blamed you for a lot of things because that was easier than trying to make sense of the world." Her voice wavered slightly, but she held steady. "And I know I hurt you. I know I pushed you away, and I know you didn't deserve all of that." I felt a slow ache building behind my ribs, the kind that rises like a tide. But I kept still. I didn't want to interrupt her. Not now, not with something this rare, for a long time. She said I didn't want to face that, because if I admitted that I hurt you, then I'd also have to admit that you were always there trying, even when I wasn't meeting you halfway, and that meant I wasn't the victim I thought I was. Her words reached somewhere old inside me, some room in the heart that hadn't been touched in years. She exhaled shakily and looked down at her hands. "I'm not saying everything was perfect, or that you never made mistakes. You did. But I think I've spent too much time holding on to the version of you that existed only in my worst memories." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat wouldn't let anything through. She continued softly, "And now, with the wedding coming up, I don't want there to be this wall between us. I don't want to look back one day and regret that I kept you at arm's length for so long." She hesitated again, then added in a voice small but sincere, "I don't want you to feel like you're not part of my life." Something warm and painful pressed behind my eyes. I blinked it away. "Claire," I finally managed to say, "you have no idea how much hearing that means to me." She looked up then, and there was a flicker of something genuine in her expression. Relief, maybe, or hope. "I want you at the wedding," she said, "really there, not just attending. I want you to be part of it." For a moment the world softened. The gray outside the window seemed a little less gray. The ache in my chest eased just enough to let in something lighter. But before I could speak, she continued, and the tone shifted. "There's something else," she said. The way she said it made the air in the room feel suddenly heavier. "There are a few financial things we need to go over." Financial, the word landed strangely. Claire had never discussed money with me. Not once, even when she was younger. She had been fiercely independent in that regard. "What kind of things?" I asked carefully. She hesitated, choosing her words with care. "Well, the wedding is bigger than I first planned. There have been a lot of costs. Catering, decor, photography, things I didn't anticipate, and it's gotten a little overwhelming." I nodded slowly. "I understand that weddings can get expensive." She swallowed. "I was hoping maybe you could help just with some of it." I didn't react, not visibly at least, but inside something shifted, just slightly, like the sound of a floorboard settling under pressure. I leaned back a little. "How much is some?" She took a breath, held it, released it. 500,000. For a moment the world fell utterly silent. Even the distant chatter in the cafe seemed to fade. I stared at her, not because I couldn't believe what she'd said, but because she said it with the same calmness someone might use when asking for a small favor. $500,000, I repeated quietly. She nodded, no embarrassment, no uncertainty, just a steady, almost expectant expression. I let the number settle in the space between us. $500,000, more money than most people ever have the chance to save in a lifetime. And I could tell instantly that she had rehearsed this moment, that this was the real reason for the meeting. Maybe not the only reason, but the central one, the one she'd been building up to. "I know it's a lot," she said quickly. "But everything has been planned already. Deposits have been made, contracts signed, and I really want this wedding to be perfect. It's the most important day of my life." Her voice softened, almost pleading. "And it would mean a lot if my father helped make it possible." I felt something inside me, something old, something tender, begin to lean forward, then pause, because beneath the softness, beneath the emotional confession earlier, beneath the carefully chosen words, something didn't feel right, not wrong yet, just not right, but I didn't respond immediately. I needed to hear more. "Claire," I said gently, "why didn't you come to me before making all these commitments?" She froze, just for a second. But I noticed. Then she smiled, thin and practiced. "I didn't want to bother you unless it got overwhelming." It wasn't an answer, not really, but she pushed on before I could question her further. "I want you to feel like you're part of this," she said again. "And this would, I don't know, help make up for some of the distance between us." There it was, a subtle shift, a pressure, a transaction wrapped in sentiment, and I felt myself retreat inward. Not entirely, but enough to observe what was happening with a clearer eye. But I kept my voice calm. "I'm not saying no." I told her, "I'm saying we need to talk about it properly. We need to understand what's going on." She nodded, but her expression tightened ever so slightly. I recognized that look. It was the look of someone who had expected a different response. We talked a little longer, but the warmth from earlier didn't return, at least not all the way. She left the cafe with a hug that felt slightly more forced than the one she'd arrived with, and I watched her walk away with a feeling I couldn't name. Not dread, not sadness, something else. Something suspended between hope and unease. And as I drove home, one thought repeated itself in my mind, unbidden and unwelcome. Something about this isn't adding up. Something about this isn't what it seems, and I feared, deeply, that the wedding wasn't the only thing she wasn't telling me. I didn't sleep well that night, not because of the number she'd given me. Numbers are just numbers, and I've lived long enough to know they only have power if you hand them the keys to your peace, but because of the way she had said it. As if $500,000 were a natural next step in our slow attempt at reconciliation. as if this amount of money were less a financial request and more a test, or worse, an obligation. When I finally drifted off, it was in that shallow, uneasy way where every dream feels like an echo of something unresolved. I kept dreaming of her as a little girl, running ahead of me in the park, calling to me with that bright, fearless laughter. But in each dream, she disappeared around a corner, and when I reached it, she wasn't there, just empty space where she used to be. When morning came, I made coffee I barely tasted and sat at the kitchen table staring out the window. The sunlight looked too gentle for the heaviness in my chest. It wasn't the money itself. I need to make that clear, even to myself. I've worked hard in my life, saved responsibly, and I'm not in a position where a request like that would sink me. Would it sting? Of course. $500,000 is $500,000, no matter how securely you're standing. But it wasn't impossible. No, what weighed on me was the feeling that something else was tangled in that number. Something emotional, something unspoken, something that had nothing to do with wedding costs or deposits or perfection. There was a tone in her voice when she asked for it, a tone that suggested expectation, a tone that implied she wasn't asking because she wanted my support, but because she believed she was owed it. I'd never felt owed before. Needed, yes, loved sometimes, resented occasionally, but never owed, and that shift, subtle but sharp, rattled me in a way I couldn't quite articulate. I decided I needed to think with a clear head. And when I need clarity, I walk, not with any destination in mind. I just let my feet choose their own way. That morning, they took me through the older part of town, past storefronts that had changed hands a dozen times since Claire was a child, past the bookstore where she used to sit cross-legged on the carpet, flipping through animal encyclopedias she never bought but always wanted, past the corner cafe where her mother and I once had a fight that neither of us remembered the next day, but the walls probably still echo with. Eventually, I found myself at the park, the same park we'd visited when she was young, the same one near the cafe where we had met the day before. I hadn't intended to end up there, but that's the thing about the subconscious. It has its own map, its own logic, and it doesn't always bother explaining its route. I sat on a bench overlooking the pond. The water was still, holding the reflection of the sky with a kind of quiet dignity. A few ducks were paddling lazily across it, utterly unmoved by human concerns. There's a certain comfort in the indifference of nature, a reminder that not everything in the world pivots around the weight of our personal troubles. I must have been sitting there for a good 20 minutes before I heard footsteps approach. I didn't look up right away because I thought it was just another passerby. But then a familiar voice spoke. "Dad," I turned, and there she was, Claire, standing a few feet from me, surprised to see me but masking it with a smile that was just a little too controlled. "What are you doing here?" she asked. I returned her smile, though mine wasn't forced, thinking. I said, "Walking, ended up here." She nodded and sat beside me, though not too close. A polite distance, safe, measured. "I sometimes come here too," she said quietly, "when I need to think." We sat there in silence for a while, watching the ducks. It was a peaceful moment, but underneath it, I sensed a thread of tension, thin but present. Finally, Claire spoke. "I'm sorry about yesterday if I overwhelmed you." I turned to her. Her tone was soft, but her posture was stiff, defensive almost. "You didn't overwhelm me." I said gently, "You surprised me, yes, but I'm not upset with you." She nodded again, but her eyes didn't relax. "I know it's a lot to ask," she said. "The money, I mean, but I wouldn't ask if I didn't really need it. Tell me something." I said quietly, "Are you asking for help, or asking for me to fix something?" Her breath caught, barely, but I noticed. She looked away. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said, choosing my tone carefully, "that you didn't come to me before the decisions were made, or before the contracts were signed. You came after, when the consequences were already locked in." She didn't answer. Her jaw tightened the faintest twitch, so I continued gently but steadily, "And I want to understand why." She closed her eyes for a moment, like she was searching for an answer she hadn't prepared. When she opened them again, there was a flicker of frustration. "I didn't think you'd help," she said. The honesty was sharp, unexpected. "Why would you think that?" I asked. "Because?" Her voice trembled just slightly. "Because when I was younger, you didn't always help when I needed you. There it was, the old wound, the old narrative, the old version of me she had held onto for years. "Claire," I said softly, "I wasn't absent. I wasn't perfect, but I wasn't uninterested in your life." "I know," she said quietly, "but back then, I didn't feel like I could depend on you, and maybe that's still in me somewhere." I let her words settle. They didn't hurt the way they used to, not because they were true, but because I had learned to accept her perspective, even when it wasn't the whole picture. After a long pause, she added, "I didn't want to give you the chance to say no before I even asked. I thought if I showed you everything was already planned, you'd feel, I don't know, obligated." There was a rawness in her confession that caught me off guard. "Claire," I said, "I don't want our relationship to be built on obligation." She didn't respond. A breeze moved across the pond, gently rippling the reflection of the sky. A child nearby laughed as he chased a pigeon. The world kept moving, unaware of the delicate conversation unfolding on the bench. I took a slow breath. "What I want," I said softly, "is to understand you, to support you, not because I have to, but because I choose to." She stared ahead, her eyes glistening faintly. "I just wanted the wedding to be perfect," she whispered. "I wanted everything to be beautiful. I wanted people to look at it and feel like I had finally done something right." There was more in those words than she intended to reveal. A deeper insecurity, a deeper fear, and something else too, something she wasn't telling me. "Claire," I said gently, "is everything okay?" She shook her head quickly, as if to say yes and no at the same time. Then she stood abruptly. "I should go," she said. "I have a lot to take care of. We'll talk more later, I promise." She forced a smile, leaned down, and kissed my cheek, and then she walked away, her pace quick, her shoulders tense. I watched her until she was out of sight, and as the quiet settled around me, a thought rose unbidden, sharp as a knife. She's hiding something, not something small, something large enough to cast a shadow over everything she'd said. And as I sat there on the bench, listening to the soft rustle of the wind in the trees, I realized something that chilled me. I wasn't sure if the wedding was the thing in trouble, or my daughter. I spent the rest of that day in a strange kind of quiet. The world around me moved as it always did, cars passing by, people chatting on sidewalks, the hum of everyday life, but none of it seemed to land. It all felt like radio static in another room. My mind kept circling back to Claire's face, the way her expression tightened when she talked about the money, the way she had walked away from the park as though something were physically dragging her. It wasn't the request that unsettled me. Parents help their children. That's part of the job, part of the instinct. What unsettled me was the pressure behind it, the secrecy, the way she seemed both vulnerable and guarded at the same time, like someone standing behind a glass wall with their hand pressed against it. Not far, but unreachable. By evening, the heaviness in my chest hadn't eased. I made myself dinner I barely touched, rinsed the dishes, and sat at my desk staring at old photographs. Claire at age 6, holding a sparkler on the 4th of July. Claire at 11 in her soccer uniform, mud splashed up her legs, smiling like she'd discovered the secret to happiness. Claire at 14 pretending to be annoyed when I caught her singing loudly in the car. There was a softness in those old moments, a gentleness between us that had been lost somewhere along the way. And I kept wondering when exactly it had slipped out of our hands. Was it gradual, one sharp moment, 100 small ones? If I had been paying closer attention, could I have stopped the drift? Sometimes I think memory is unfair. It lets you revisit the past, but never repair it. At around 9, my phone buzzed, a message from Claire. "Can you come to the tasting tomorrow? We're sampling the wedding menu. It'd be nice if you were there." I stared at the message for a moment because it reflected something new, a gesture of inclusion, not a big one, but a sincere one. I typed back and said yes. The next afternoon, I drove to the venue, a large estate on a hill with a view of the river, a place more suited for royalty than ordinary people. I pulled into the gravel driveway, took in the sprawling architecture, the fountains, the polished stone steps, and thought, no wonder this wedding is costing a fortune. Inside, the air was cool, scented with eucalyptus and something faintly floral. A coordinator with a perfectly rehearsed smile led me to a long table set with linen napkins and samples arranged like artwork. As I approached, I saw Claire seated at the far end, flipping through a binder of options. She looked up and visibly brightened when she saw me. That did something warm inside me, unexpected and welcome. "Dad, I didn't think you'd be this early. I didn't want to miss anything," I said. She grinned genuinely this time and motioned for me to sit beside her. Not across, beside. The coordinator walked us through each dish as though revealing sacred artifacts. Appetizers shaped like delicate sculptures, entrees described with words like infusion and truffle essence, desserts so ornate I was afraid to break them open. Claire seemed happy, really happy. She asked my opinion on everything, listened carefully, joked lightly. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't walking on eggshells around her, and for a moment the heaviness of the previous day faded. But then someone else arrived, a man in a tailored navy suit, confident stride, perfectly styled hair, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Her fiancé, Lucas. I had met him twice before, both times brief, both times polite but distant. He shook my hand firmly but without warmth, as though performing a necessary courtesy. "Good to see you again," he said, but the tone suggested he could have gone either way. "You too," I replied. He sat across from us and immediately reached for Claire's binder, flipping through it with a possessiveness that felt more like ownership than enthusiasm. "I hope the tasting has been productive," he said. "It's been lovely," Claire said. He nodded, then looked toward the coordinator. "We'll be selecting the premium wine pairing package, by the way, the $1,600 option." My eyebrows rose slightly. Claire glanced at me, just briefly, but enough for me to see something flicker in her eyes, not excitement, not pride, something closer to tension, a tug, a pull, an expectation. As the tasting continued, I found myself watching the two of them more closely. Not intentionally, just naturally. Lucas was attentive, yes, but not gentle. Polite, yes, but not warm. Every decision he made carried a tone of finality, and every time Claire offered a suggestion, he responded with something subtle but unmistakable, a sigh. A correction, a dismissive tone disguised as logic, no hostility, nothing overt, just a faint but constant pressure, like a hand on the back of her neck, guiding her where he wanted her to go. At one point, Claire mentioned preferring the second entree option. Lucas paused, then said, "The first one is more refined. It matches the rest of the event." She nodded instantly, too quickly. I pretended not to notice, but inside, something stirred. After the tasting ended, Claire excused herself to speak with the florist. Lucas lingered behind with me, straightening a cufflink, checking his watch. "You know," he said without looking up, "Claire's really excited about this wedding." "I can see that," I said carefully. "It's important to her that everything is perfect, important to both of us." I nodded slowly. "And it seems like you're both planning something quite elaborate." He chuckled, a low, dry sound. "You can't put a price on a perfect day." "I suppose not," I said, though the tone was deliberately neutral. He finally looked at me, his eyes sharp. "She told me she talked to you about the financial aspect." "Yes," I said. There was a beat of silence, then another. "Well," he said, "I'm glad. It's good that you want to support her." There was something in his expression, a hint of expectation, a trace of entitlement, a small but undeniable assumption that my contribution wasn't a request at all, but a foregone conclusion. I held his gaze steadily. "I always support my daughter, I'm sure," he said, though the words felt like a pat on the head rather than agreement. Before I could reply, Claire rejoined us, smiling brightly. Lucas wrapped an arm loosely around her waist, not affectionate, more possessive, and kissed her cheek. "There you are," he said. She smiled, but not with her whole face. We said our goodbyes, and as I walked to my car, I felt that same unease from the cafe return. Only now it had a direction, a shape, a center of gravity. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the secrecy. It wasn't even the wedding. It was him, Lucas. And as I sat behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly, a realization landed with the quiet force of something inevitable. Whatever trouble Claire was in, she wasn't in it alone. And I feared more than anything that she wasn't standing beside him. She was standing behind him. That night, I found myself sitting in the living room long after the lights should have been turned off. letting the quiet settle over me like a heavy coat I couldn't quite shrug off. The tasting had ended hours earlier, yet the images from it replayed in my mind with uncomfortable clarity. Claire's forced smile, Lucas's subtle corrections, the way her shoulders seemed to tighten every time he spoke. I had seen dynamics like that before, in friends, in acquaintances, in strangers sitting too quietly at restaurant tables. There's a certain stiffness in the body, a certain look in the eyes, a certain reflexive retreat in conversation that gives away a person who has learned to fold themselves smaller to keep the peace. I had never imagined seeing that in my daughter, but there it was, still. I wanted to be careful. I didn't want to leap to conclusions, especially not when the stakes were this high. Weddings are stressful, money is overwhelming, and relationships, no matter how healthy, get tugged during events like these. Not every tense moment is a symptom of something rotten underneath, but something in my bones told me this wasn't just normal stress. It was too familiar in all the wrong ways. I poured myself a drink and stared into it, not because I wanted it, but because it gave my hands something to hold, something to do, something that interrupted the impulse to pick up the phone and call Claire and ask outright, "Are you okay?" Because if she wasn't, would she even tell me? If she was hiding something now, what else might she be hiding, and why? The next day, she sent me a photo of a floral arrangement. "What do you think of these colors?" she asked. A normal question, a light one, something she might have asked years ago when we were still close. It might have brought comfort, but instead it left me staring at the screen, wondering if this was her way of keeping the peace, maintaining the illusion, avoiding the deeper conversation simmering beneath everything. I told her the colors were beautiful. She responded with a small heart emoji, and that was that. 3 days passed. I kept busy, but my thoughts kept drifting back to her. The money was still an unanswered question between us, not ignored but suspended, and in the quiet spaces of my mind a pattern started to form. A suspicion, not yet solid but strong enough to unsettle me. I didn't want to accuse her fiancé of anything, not without reason, but the truth was unavoidable. Something about Lucas made my instincts bristle. His polish, his posture, the way he spoke with confidence that wasn't earned but assumed, it all felt too carefully constructed, too rehearsed, like a man who wore his personality the way others wore suits, neat, crisp, tailored to be convincing. And for the first time I wondered, what did Claire see in him, and what had she been told to ignore? That week, I finally asked her if we could talk again, just the two of us. She agreed, but her response was delayed by several hours, and when she did reply, it was overly enthusiastic, like she was trying to compensate for something. We met at her apartment. I hadn't been there in years. She lived in a modern building, sleek lobby, glass elevators, polished concrete floors, beautiful but impersonal. As I walked down the hallway, freshly painted and decorated with abstract artwork, I wondered how much of this life felt like hers, and how much of it felt like something she had been folded into. She opened the door before I even knocked. "Dad, hi." Her smile was bright, but her eyes gave away that she'd been nervous. I stepped inside. The apartment was immaculate, almost unnervingly so. Not a cushion out of place, not a dish in the sink, not a single object that suggested life beyond the curated perfection. It was like stepping into a home staged for a magazine spread, not a place where two people laughed, argued, or lived. "This is beautiful," I said honestly. She beamed, but her hands fidgeted slightly. "Thank you. I've been trying to keep it neat. Lucas likes things organized." Something in the way she said that made my spine stiffen. But I didn't comment, not yet. "Do you want some tea?" she asked. "Sure." She moved into the kitchen, and I followed at a comfortable distance. I watched the way she moved, precise, efficient, careful. Like someone performing for an audience, even though it was just me. She poured the water, set out the cups, arranged everything meticulously. When she handed me my tea, her hand trembled, just slightly. Barely noticeable, but not to me. We sat at the small dining table. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "How are you feeling?" I finally asked, with the wedding coming up, I mean. She nodded quickly. "Too quickly? Good. Excited. A little stressed, but that's normal, right?" "Sure," I said gently. "Stress is normal. Avoidance isn't." Her eyes flicked up sharply. "I'm not avoiding anything." "I didn't say you were," I replied. "But the last time we talked, you seemed overwhelmed." She looked away. I leaned forward. Claire, I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to pry. I'm here because I love you, and because I can feel something's weighing on you." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. "I'm fine, Dad," she whispered. "Then look at me and tell me that." I said softly. She didn't look up. The silence stretched. Then she finally spoke, quietly, guardedly. "It's just a lot to manage, the wedding, the planning, everything. Lucas has high standards. I'm trying to meet them." "And your own standards?" I asked. She hesitated. Then, with a brittle smile, she said, "They're the same." But I saw it, the tiny crack in the mask, the small, momentary drop in her voice where the truth leaked through. "Claire," I said, "do you want this wedding? Not the event, not the spectacle, the marriage." Her breath hitched. "Yes," she said quickly. "Too quickly, of course I do." "Then why does it sound like you're convincing yourself as much as you're convincing me?" Her eyes glistened suddenly, shiny like glass catching the light. But she blinked the emotion away as though afraid it would betray her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't want to talk about this." "Why not?" "Because I don't want you to think badly of him." A chill slid down my spine. "I don't think badly of him," I said carefully. "I think I'm trying to understand who he really is." She looked up at me then, really looked, and for a second the veneer dropped completely. Her expression trembled with something raw. "Something frightened. He's not bad," she said slowly. "He's just particular. He likes things a certain way." "How certain?" I asked. She closed her eyes. "Dad, please don't. I don't want to start something." "Starting something is better than pretending nothing's wrong," I said gently. Nothing came out of her at first. Then she whispered, "I can handle it." That was the sentence that made my chest tighten. People say I can handle it when they're already at the breaking point. "Claire," I said, "you shouldn't have to handle anything alone." "I'm not alone," she said. But her voice trembled. "I have Lucas." I wanted to reach across the table. I wanted to hold her hand. But before I could, she straightened abruptly, wiping her eyes with quick, practiced motions. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm just tired, wedding stress, that's all." She forced a smile. "Really, everything's okay." But her eyes said the opposite. And then, just as I was about to ask something deeper, something more pointed, the apartment door clicked. Her entire body flinched, not a large movement, not dramatic, just a small, reflexive tightening, like a deer hearing a twig snap in the forest. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Lucas stepped inside. Perfect hair, perfect suit, perfect posture, and the moment he saw me sitting there, a flicker, so fast most would miss it, crossed his face, not surprise, not irritation, something colder, something appraising. "Well," he said, his tone too smooth, "I didn't realize we had company." Claire stood quickly, almost too quickly. "I invited him. I thought it would have been nice to know," he said, still smiling. But the smile was sharp, thin. He kissed her cheek, but his hand stayed on her arm a fraction too long. Just long enough to make her shoulders tense. Then he turned to me. "Enjoying your visit?" "I am," I said evenly. "Good." He loosened his tie slightly, a casual motion that felt more like a display of territorial comfort. Claire hovered beside him, small and quiet. "That's a nice suit," I said, because sometimes a neutral comment reveals more than a confrontation. He smoothed the sleeve with satisfaction. "Thank you, custom, unique fabrics, expensive taste runs in our family." His eyes flicked toward Claire, a subtle reminder, a subtle dynamic, a subtle warning. He looked back at me. "I assume Claire told you about the financial situation." "She mentioned some things." I said. He nodded. "Good. It's important that everyone does their part. Everyone, not every parent. Not every contributor, everyone." Claire stared at the floor, and then it hit me. Not like thunder, not like revelation, but like a cold blade sliding into place. The wedding wasn't spiraling out of control. The person behind it was, and the more I watched the two of them, the more certain I became of something deeply unsettling. My daughter wasn't planning a wedding, she was surviving one. Lucas excused himself to change out of his work clothes, but the way he said it, light, casual, with a hint of suggestion that Claire should have anticipated his arrival, made my jaw tighten. Claire didn't move until he disappeared into the hallway. Only then did her shoulders sag just slightly, like a breath she'd been holding finally slipped out without permission. She offered me a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He's had a long day," she said. It was the kind of excuse people give when they've been trained to give it. I sipped my tea to keep my expression neutral. Everyone has long days, I said, but not everyone walks into a room like that. She blinked, startled. Like what? Like they're assessing the temperature. She stiffened. He didn't. I'm not criticizing him. I said softly, I'm telling you how it felt. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her fingers fiddled with the edge of a napkin on the table. I could see it, her instinct to defend him, the reflexive one, but beneath it something else trembled, words she didn't know how to say, fears she didn't want acknowledged. Before either of us could speak again, Lucas's voice drifted down the hallway. Claire, her reaction was immediate, stomach clenching, breath pausing, posture straightening. A reaction I had seen before in people who lived carefully, in households where tone and timing mattered too much. She stood quickly and smoothed her shirt. I should see what he needs. You don't have to, I said. Her eyes darted toward the hallway. I do. She disappeared into the bedroom, her footsteps too fast, too quiet. I stayed at the table, staring at the untouched tea in front of me. I didn't want to eavesdrop, but their voices carried softly down the hall, muffled but distinct enough to discern tone. His tone was firm, low, controlled. Hers was quick, apologetic, then silence, then nothing. When she finally returned, her smile was back on, but her eyes were red around the edges. Sorry about that, she said. He had a question about dinner. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. Her explanation was too polished, too ready. A prepared answer, Claire. I said gently, what did he say to you just now? She froze, breath caught mid-chest. Nothing, she said quietly. That didn't sound like nothing. Her eyes flicked to the hallway, then back at me. Her voice dropped to a whisper, like she was terrified the walls themselves would report her. Dad, please, not here. I leaned back in my chair. That was all I needed to hear. Not here. Not here meant there were consequences for honesty in this space. Not here meant the walls had weight. Not here meant that even if she couldn't admit it out loud, she felt unsafe telling the truth within the confines of her own home. I softened my voice, then come with me. We can get coffee, go for a walk, anywhere you want. She hesitated, and in that hesitation fear lived. I can't, she whispered. Why not? He doesn't like when I leave without telling him. It looks disrespectful. Disrespectful. A normal, healthy partner doesn't use that word for errands or fresh air. A normal partner doesn't equate autonomy with disobedience. A normal partner doesn't need movement supervised or explained. But I didn't say any of that. I simply nodded, then tell him you're stepping out with me. Her face went pale. He'll think I planned it. He can think whatever he wants, I said. This is your life. She bit her lip, hard enough to leave a faint mark. You don't understand how he gets, Dad. The ache that sentence gave me was something physical. How he gets, I repeated quietly. And how is that? She looked at the table, her voice a thread. Please don't make me say it. I exhaled slowly, every muscle in my chest tightening with the effort of staying calm. Then let me ask something else, I said. Do you feel like you can be yourself around him? She swallowed. Yes, she said. But she didn't nod. She didn't smile. She didn't meet my eyes. So I asked a different question. Do you feel like you can disagree with him? She flinched, a tiny instinctive recoil. I don't want to argue, she whispered. That's not what I asked. Silence. The kind of silence that feels like a confession. Before she could answer, or avoid answering, Lucas came back down the hallway, wearing a fitted shirt and a calm expression. Everything okay here? He asked. Yes, Claire said quickly. He walked behind her and placed a hand on her shoulder. It looked affectionate enough, but there was pressure in the way his fingers curved. I could see it in the way her body subtly tensed beneath his touch. I told Claire we should have dinner together tonight. He said. His voice was smooth, but his eyes were sharp on me, as a family. The word family didn't sound warm coming from him. It sounded like possession. I smiled politely. That's kind of you, but I should get going. Claire's eyes flicked toward me, not pleading for me to stay, but pleading not to leave her alone. It broke something inside me. Actually, I said casually, I was hoping Claire and I could take a quick walk before I head home. Lucas's smile didn't falter, but something behind it hardened. A walk, just around the block, I said. Fresh air. For a full 3 seconds, he said nothing, just stared at me, then at Claire, then back at me. Finally, with a tone dipped in polite control, he answered, I'd prefer she stay. He didn't say it like a request. He said it like an instruction. I kept my voice calm. It's her decision. He looked at her again. This time, she didn't even breathe. Claire, he prompted. Her lips parted. I think maybe. He squeezed her shoulder. Just a fraction, just enough. Her words died in her throat, and in that moment, watching her silence, watching his quiet dominance, I felt a heat rise inside me I hadn't felt in years, a protective anger sharpened by love. The kind that makes you stand up without realizing you've moved. So I stood, and Lucas's smile thinned. Is there a problem? He asked. Yes, I said. And for the first time since I'd arrived, Claire looked at me with something like hope. Yes, I repeated, my voice steady. There is a problem. Lucas's expression didn't change, but something about him sharpened, like a blade turning ever so slightly to catch the light. Claire went still beside him, not breathing, not blinking, waiting for the fallout. What kind of problem? He asked. The kind, I said, that becomes obvious the moment a man believes he can decide what a grown woman is allowed to do. His jaw tightened by a millimeter. He hit it quickly, but I saw it. I doubted he was used to being challenged. People like him never are. Claire whispered, Dad, but I didn't break eye contact with him. I'm taking a walk with my daughter. I said simply if she wants to go. Her breath stuttered. She stared at the floor as if the grain of the wood could save her, and then, because some instincts never die, she glanced at Lucas first. He didn't glare, he didn't scowl, he didn't raise a hand or his voice. He just looked at her with quiet expectation, the kind that punishes more than shouting ever could. Something in her wilted at the sight of it, and for the first time I understood the full shape of their relationship, not from what she said, but from how she moved. People in controlling situations don't always recognize the control. They shrink gradually, inch by inch, thinking it's compromise, thinking it's love, thinking it's sacrifice, until one day someone else notices the space they've lost. And right now, I was that someone. Claire, I said gently, look at me. It took her a moment. When she did, her eyes were glassy with fear she couldn't hide anymore. You don't need permission, I said quietly. And not from him, not from anyone. You decide. No one else. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. Her hands trembled. Lucas's hand tightened on her shoulder. So, he said softly, what do you want to do? It wasn't a question. It was a warning wrapped in silk. Claire closed her eyes. I saw the war inside her, fear on one side, the faint flicker of herself on the other, the self she'd buried so deeply she barely remembered it existed. For a moment I thought she'd fold, then her eyes opened, and for the first time all evening she didn't look small. Dad, she whispered, let's go. Lucas froze, just a second, just a flicker, but I saw the darkness behind his calm mask, and I knew he wasn't used to losing. Before he could speak, Claire stepped away from him, not far. Just one small step, but that step was everything, a rebellion, a beginning, a spark. Excuse us. I said quietly to Lucas, we'll be back soon. He didn't respond. He just stared at her with a coldness so intense it made the air in the room shift. Then softly, dangerously, we'll talk later. Every instinct in me wanted to drag her out of the apartment and never let her come back. But I stayed calm for her sake. Panic would only make her feel weaker. We walked out into the hallway. The door shut behind us. Oft click, loud implications. Once we were in the elevator, Claire finally let out a breath, shaky and uneven. Dad, she whispered, voice breaking. I didn't think he was like that at first. I didn't. You don't have to explain. I said. Her shoulders shook. He doesn't hit me. He's never. Claire, I said gently, control doesn't always leave bruises on the skin. That broke her. She leaned into me, sobbing quietly, the way she used to cry when she was small, and scraped her knee, and the world felt too big. I held her there in the elevator, my hand on her back, anchoring her, grounding her. I thought I could handle it, she whispered into my shirt. I thought once the wedding was over, things would ease up. I thought, you thought love meant adjusting. I said softly, but love shouldn't require fear. The elevator doors opened, and we stepped out into the cool night air. She inhaled deeply, like she hadn't breathed in months. We walked slowly, each step loosening something in her posture. After a few minutes, she wiped her face. Dad, what do I do? There it was, the question she'd been too scared to say out loud. The question that mattered more than the wedding, more than the arguments, more than the money. What do I do? You choose yourself. I said simply, even if it scares you. She stared ahead at the street, at nothing in particular. He won't take it well, I know. He'll try to convince me to stay. I know. She turned to face me. What if I say no? Then, I said gently, you'll remember that no is a complete sentence, and I'll help you through everything that comes after. She sobbed once, sharp, painful, relieved. I'm scared. I'm here. And if I leave him, what then? Then you get your life back, I said. We sat on a bench under a street lamp. She leaned against me, small again, but not fragile, not anymore. Her fear wasn't shrinking her. It was transforming into clarity, into strength. Can I stay with you tonight? She asked. My heart broke and healed at the same time, of course. She nodded. I'll go back upstairs, pack a few things, and then, no, I said quickly. Not alone. Her breath hitched. She knew I was right. Something in her face shifted, from shame to recognition. You think he'll be angry? I know he will. So what do? We get your things tomorrow. I said, when he's not home tonight, you leave with me, just you, nothing else. For the first time in years, she squeezed my hand. Okay. We walked to my car. She got in, buckling the seatbelt with trembling hands. When I started the engine, she let out a sound, half sob, half relief. Dad, yes, thank you for coming today. I looked at her, really looked at her, my daughter, the girl I raised, the woman she became, the person who'd been slowly dimmed until she barely recognized herself. I didn't come today, I said quietly. You asked for me without realizing it. I just heard you. She wiped her tears and nodded. As we pulled away from the building, she looked at the apartment window, once with fear, then again with something steadier, something growing inside her. Resolve, she whispered almost to herself. I'm not going back. And that was the moment the wedding ended, not with a fight, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet sentence spoken in a car at night. A decision made not from anger, but from rediscovery. The decision to leave, to begin again, to choose herself. For the first time in a long time, she smiled. Small, tired, but real, and I realized something. This wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of her.